Hello, everybody. This is Chance Dunlap. Going to tell you about some Bud Stewart fishing lures today. Bud Stewart is Michigan's legendary lure maker, and that title still holds up today. Nobody had the length of career as a fishing lure carver and maker and innovator than Bud Stewart. He started as a teenager in the 1920s and worked all the way towards the ends of his life. Um, he was producing lures in quantity even in the 1980s. So, some of my absolutely favorite fishing lures are his early work. Most of these, in this case here, are earlier baits, a variety. He's really famous for the Crippled Wiggler, which is this kind of bait here, kind of a curved body that's a fat rear body, and then the face slopes off, usually scalloped out a little bit. You can kind of feel where his finger, that shape, is the dimensions probably of his finger. He's known for these cuts and some eccentricity. They mostly follow a center line, line tie here, going straight back to the rear, but definitely gets some implied, asymmetrical nature to these baits. A lot of these earlier baits have a hole in the belly where he was able to seat the screw eye in there to hold the hook, and they also have this wire, twisted wire apparatus back here at the back that has an eye screw here, some kind of a staple towards holding the front of the wire, and that's all usually painted over unless the paint's chipped off. So that's a good sign that it's an earlier one. He also made these pork rind hooks at the back. I consider this one to be from the era when he really perfected the Crippled Wiggler, where he could make them, even though they're kind of folky and homemade looking, he could make them in quantity. I mean, he perfected his pork rind hook back here too. It was lighter wire that's actually flexible, be easier for a fisherman to put some chunk of something on there than some of the other ones that have just like a really stiff piece of wire. He's also famous for the crippled mouse. For me, this one's about as good as a crippled mouse gets, unless it was, signed or numbered or something. He's known, even on the Crippled Wigglers, for having these little cut tin surface splasher kind of ears on there. This one's really nice because all the paint's still intact. I love the way you put a dot right there on them. So if you're out there looking for Bud Stewart baits and you have three to compare, and they're very similar, except one of them still has the eye spots on the little splashers, that's the one, even though you should probably get all three of them just because they're really cool. See, this guy has the pork rind hook. It does not have the twisted wire apparatus, even though most early Crippled mice do. It does have the belly hook. He just used some little nail heads as eyes, and he would just put a dot of paint over those. Simple screw eye up here in the nose. But the mouse, you see, is a lot wider. It's not as long in length. Its body is deeper. And so those are kind of telltale signs of the Crippled Wiggler versus the Crippled Mouse. There's some other baits in this case. This, for example, is called a snake wiggler. These are early. He hand cut some metal bits, this tail flasher, this belly one, and this kind of spoon on the belly there. This one even has a wire line tie out front. He had not perfected his spots yet, and his wife had told several collectors that when you watch Bud apply the spots, she compared him to her sewing machine of going that fast, rapidly making each little dot. The perfected spots are, some kind of a lacquer paint dots probably put onto the surface of other lacquer, and so they resisted in like a clear coat kind of finish and pulled apart. Really lovely. You can see this one's missing the paint on the splashers, but this one's just an especially cool, and it's really wide. Um, I'm not. This one's kind of in between a crippled wiggler and a crippled mouse, but it's a really neat earlier bait. This was one I think is neat. It's definitely an early one before he perfected. It has a hook on the belly and a little pork rind hook back here at the back. So I'm not really sure what he was going for. I assume he intended for it to be that way. You can see the spots are small. They're less significant looking, but it's lovely in its overall form. It's beautiful. It's even a little bigger in size. One of the coolest ones I have is this large size snake wiggler. It doesn't have the metal belly plate like the smaller ones do, but it does have this little spoon and a little hand cut tail flasher back there. Look at that red with those spots. I mean, that one's just off the charts cool. And look at the way you cut the sides in. I mean, if that one doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. Something to look for in the field when looking for Bud Stewart baits is authentic signature. Look at this written Stewart snake wiggler. This is the only snake wiggler that I've seen him apply the name actually onto the bait. The paint isn't crazy interesting. It's just kind of silver gray with white. But I imagine it would be effective for catching fish. But he didn't really sign his name like an artist. So later ones, collectors would go find Bud and give him their baits, say, here, please sign these. And he would oblige. But he signed them in a way it looks like a signature. These earlier authentic signed pieces are just him basically writing his business on the bait. So even the handwriting is just this kind of quick, almost elegant looking, and then there's other ways he signed them as well. He had a numbering system for the mice and crippled wigglers, a 1 through 4 system. I don't know if we can see that or not. The light's kind of harsh. Crippled mouse, number 1, written there under the lip. I'm going to say it's not necessarily uncommon to see them that have a number written on them, but just having the whole name written out is much less common. This one also has a 1. You see it there to the right of the line tie there. This one also has a 1 on it. The 1 indicated a bait that would have a certain action, and 2s had a certain action. 30s and 4s also had an action. This one's, that rear hook is definitely not original to this bait. It probably got ripped out or something at some point, because this looks more like the hooks and the weird twisted wire that he used in some of his musky baits from the 50s and 60s. So I definitely think Bud did a lot of reworking baits, even advertise that, if one of my baits falls apart, send it back to me, I'll fix it. And I know that he was very actively fishing his own baits all the time, so he likely wore a bunch of them out. This little mouse is a really cool one. I've seen these listed as pothole mouse. I don't really think that's an official Bud name, but look, it has a 3 on it. I've seen a few of these little black and white ones that have the 3 written on them. He must have made a little group of them in succession, but you can see it has the little twisted wire hook holder back here, the pork rind clip, even the belly hook hole. So it's kind of got it all. It's just black and white rather than the cool spots. This is an interesting one. It's kind of like a minnow swimming on its side. It's kind of cool with just the kind of plain white paint with some colorful accents. It has one splasher here that's twisted a little bit. It has the big dome eyes, which he used mostly on decoys and musky baits. Unfortunately, the paint is very often chipped off the eyes on these lures that have them. But this guy's like a little wounded minnow or something swimming on his side. He called these bass teasers, and I just think they're really cool. This one's an earlier one, but a little later on, he actually changed the crippled wiggler to basically that form. You can see this one has his later streaked paint. This one's probably from the 40s. It's before he quit doing spots. Look at this. This has these spots over gray, which is super neat. Eye under here, eye up here. Has paint still on that little splasher fin. You know, it's kind of neat looking. I mean, these things get real abstract looking. You know, you don't see this particular bait that often, combining streaky paint and the spots. The streaks, I imagine he was either dipping or applying, pouring, and then letting them dip, ooze, and drip, you know. They're all different. There's no way to really repeat that over and over. There's some other variations of earlier crippled wigglers and crippled mice. This is one that I consider from when he really developed his business. He knew what he was doing, because there's consistency to baits of this type, but his paint's still not fully resolved. Most of these from this era have this little twisted wire line tie, which I think is really cool. It still has the tack eyes, it has the splashers. This one has these weird holes drilled underneath the splashers. I'm imagining that he had an intention for that. Very simple, just a bent wire pork rind clip. It has the twisted bent wire hook holder at the back. But some of these have a single shank belly hook. You know, these are some of my favorite of Bud Stewart's baits. You just don't see these too often that have the single hook on the belly. And these have to be very early in his actual kind of, I'm going to make a business, Bud Stewart fishing lures. I'm going to make a lot of them and I'm going to sell them. I think these were some of the early examples from that era. They're not just prototypes. Some early one is this one, just wearing mostly white paint, very simple hardware, just has a very simple piece of wire sticking out of the back, simple ear splashers. You know, I can't explain why some of them are so simple, and then other ones from the same era are much more complicated. You can't ignore the crabs. The crabs are some of my absolute favorite Bud Stewart baits. This one's particularly neat. Still has the pork rind hook. You know, the hooks are arranged similarly to others. Sloping face, but look, the eyes are back here on the butt. You know, there's so many classic baits, crabs. You know, heading. Everybody had to make some kind of a crippled crab kind of bait. And so Bud got in there. These don't work differently than the mice. They just look different. So maybe these were meant to catch fishermen. I don't really know. But one thing he did on the crabs is he did some nice, you know, curvy bodies on them that are usually pretty straight in line. There's not a lot of asymmetry to them. But I just really like how this one's broken up. You got this red, and you got spots and spots. I just think that one's super cool. Another crab that I have I think is just awesome is this bigger one. It has a more elongated body, but it has this cut tin flasher at the back. So it has pork rind hook, tin splasher, twisted wire hook holder, the hole in the belly. You know, a lot of times the lead belly weights he'd put in these, that paint just chips off of those. It's just unfortunate. This one has some kind of paint issue here I haven't really figured out. If that was something that happened from the very beginning, so this one might have been like in his prototype pile or something. But it just, I don't know. You might uncover some weird ones that have paint streaked over them. You actually see these once in a while, and you know, and I believe they're definitely Bud Stewart's efforts to probably modify something that got damaged, or you know, maybe one of his friends, they were experimenting, because he had a bunch of buddies that fished with him all the time, and you know, it's really hard to know exactly the history of these things. There's some other weird mice called the lathe run mice. At least that's what I understand these to be called. These are kind of ugly looking, to be honest with you. Their form is not as graceful and elegant. They don't have the hand carving. These were roughed out on a copy lathe, um, and as an intent to try to lower production costs, where he could make something quicker. Apparently, he wasn't real happy about these, probably because he couldn't sell them because they were just so weird looking. Um, but I think they're pretty neat, especially if you can find one that has nice spots on it. This one would have had a little splasher right there in the back, but it's gone, and has two line ties, which is kind of cool, and some streaky paint on the belly, and you know, I know I think they're pretty neat. I think these are underrated overall in Bud's, you know, efforts at Lurecraft. Here's another one that has some paint streaked on it, you know, and I can't really explain why, but I think it's really neat. That one has some really cool shaping to the body. A couple here that we need to look at are the big one and the little one. You know, these, if they're crippled wigglers, they're kind of extremes. You know, this one's really chunky, almost like the body of the larger mice, but it's elongated. Maybe this was like a musky kind of size. It's in beautiful condition. It still has the paint on the splashers. And then this little guy was referenced as the spinning size, but it would have to really be older than what spinning reels and stuff were even available popularly. So they just maybe just a little small guy. Not nearly as small as Bud's fly rod casting sized ones. But I mean, look at that thing. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. You know, it's got all the features of the bigger ones. It's just, you know, about half the size of the normal ones. Bud continued making crippled wigglers right up to the end. You know, they changed over time. By the 1960s, 1970s, they were a very different form, and I don't have one of those. They're just kind of a humpbacked, almost, I don't really know what to compare them to. There's much more simple, but before he he evolved them into the most simple final form, probably in the late 50s, maybe into the 60s, this style came out. There's still kind of the wounded minnow look. This one has a propeller back here. You can see an eye. It just has one hook on the belly. Even the back splashes are no longer, you know, inserted into the body. They're, you know, it's got a little screw holding this thing on. The paint is airbrushed, kind of in a perch pattern. But he had a little stamp he could put on there. That was the main reason I got this one. I mainly try to collect the earlier pieces, but I liked that it was marked Bud Stewart, Flint, Michigan. I thought that was, you know, enhanced that one quite a bit. You know, there's a lot of interesting Bud Stewart baits out there. In no way do I have, you know, one of everything, but I keep looking for them and add a piece here and a piece there, and I just really love them. Bud Stewart's definitely my fishing lure making hero, and so hopefully my little recording here can help you understand some things about them, and find it useful. So, all right, well, if you see any lures, give them a closer look.